English out loud.
You're sitting in a meeting and a colleague just completely misrepresents your work in front of the entire team.
Oh, that is the worst feeling.
It really is.
Yeah.
And, if we were having this conversation in your native language right now, you would know exactly how to handle it.
Right. You'd verbally dismantle their argument in seconds. Professionally, of course, but firmly.
Exactly. You'd have that perfect, sharp reply loaded and ready to go. But the meeting is in English.
Yeah. That changes everything.
It changes everything because instead of that perfect reply, you freeze. You go completely silent.
Or, which is sometimes worse, the frustration just kind of bubbles over. You panic, and you end up saying the wrong thing.
You sound way too harsh, and then you immediately regret it.
Yeah, it's an incredibly isolating experience for intermediate English learners.
It really is.
Because there's this feeling of your personality, your competence, and your wit just vanishing. All simply because the language barrier collided with a massive emotional spike.
Which leaves people feeling completely powerless. And honestly, a bit foolish.
But the core focus of our material today is that this reaction, it's biological. It's not a personal failure. And it absolutely does not have to be your default.
That is the perfect setup for today's deep dive. We are looking at a linguistic and psychological guide designed specifically for intermediate, non-native English speakers.
The B1 and B2 learners who are dealing with real-world professional stakes.
Exactly. And the mission here is to uncover a third option. We aren't looking at grammar or verb conjugation today.
Thank goodness.
Right. No, we are looking at how to stay calm, clear, and perfectly in control during tense conversations. We're talking about emotional intelligence applied through a second language.
Which is arguably the ultimate test of fluency. Because, in any language, how you respond under pressure ultimately communicates exactly who you are.
Yeah, that's so true.
It establishes your character, your boundaries, and your professionalism. When you can master that in a language that isn't your own, you command a completely different level of respect in the room.
Let's get into the mechanics of why that freeze happens in the first place. The sources refer to this as the double pressure.
The double pressure.
Right. Because dealing with conflict is already hard enough, but when you're doing it in a second language, you're simultaneously managing your own rising emotions.
Like your heart rate is spiking, your defensive walls are up.
Exactly. While desperately searching your mental dictionary for the right vocabulary.
It's exhausting just thinking about it.
It feels like trying to defuse a ticking bomb, but you have to translate the instruction manual in your head at the exact same time.
That is such a good analogy. And the neuroscience behind that bomb-diffusing feeling is actually really fascinating.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, when someone attacks your work, your brain's fear center, the amygdala, hijacks your nervous system. It triggers that classic fight, flight, or freeze response.
Right. So you either want to yell at them or run out of the room.
Or you just stare blankly. But here's the problem. Speaking a second language requires heavy lifting from your prefrontal cortex.
Which is the logical processing part of your brain.
Precisely. And when your amygdala fires, it literally restricts cognitive resources to that prefrontal cortex.
Oh, wow. So you quite literally lose access to your English vocabulary because your brain is preparing you to survive a physical threat.
Exactly. Your cognitive load is completely maxed out. Which brings us to the most fundamental vocabulary distinction in our guide today. Reacting versus responding.
Reacting versus responding. Okay, break that down for us.
To react is what happens when the amygdala is in charge. It's immediate, it's instinctive, and it's highly emotional.
So that's the freeze, the aggressive snapback, or the tense silence.
Right. But to respond is to reply thoughtfully and intentionally. The goal here isn't to suppress your feelings. The goal is to bridge the gap between reacting and responding.
And how do you do that when your brain is screaming at you?
You do that by mastering the art of the pause. You have to force a delay to let your prefrontal cortex catch up.
Okay, but if your brain is maxed out translating vocabulary, you need a phrase you don't have to think about, right? Like a reflex.
Yes, exactly. The guide suggests what they call buy-time phrases.
Buy-time phrases, I like that.
Instead of scrambling for a counter-argument while your heart is pounding, you lean on a preloaded phrase. Something like, "That's interesting. Let me think about that for a second."
No, that's good. Or maybe, can I take a moment to process that?
Exactly. And the delivery is just as important as the words themselves. By delivering those phrases with a slow, composed tone, you are actively regulating your own nervous system.
So you're giving your brain permission to stop translating for 3 seconds and just breathe.
Right. Composure isn't about feeling calm inside. It's about appearing calm and in control on the outside while your brain catches up.
So the key vocabulary word here is composed. You are showing restraint.
Yes.
Now, the sources also suggest using filler phrases that signal active listening while you buy that time. So phrases like, I hear you, or that's a fair point, or I see your perspective.
Right. Those are great filler phrases.
But let me challenge that for a second. If someone is aggressively tearing my project apart and I look at them and say, that's a fair point, or I hear you, doesn't that sound exactly like I'm rolling over and agreeing with them?
It's a very natural fear.
Right, like aren't I just validating their attack?
No, and this is a crucial distinction. We have to separate the word acknowledge from the word agree.
Okay, so acknowledging is not agreeing.
Exactly. These phrases do not mean you agree with the critique. They function as a psychological buffer. When you look at someone who is agitated and say, I hear you, you are simply confirming receipt of the message.
You're just telling them your words have landed.
Yes, it deflates their need to yell louder or repeat themselves. Because, people usually escalate when they feel ignored.
Oh, for sure. If I think someone isn't listening, I just get louder, so this stops that. But it doesn't commit me to saying they are actually right.
Exactly. It satisfies their need to be heard, lowering their emotional temperature slightly, while buying you those precious few seconds to formulate an actual intentional response.
All right, so pausing and acknowledging works to buy a few seconds. But what do I actually do with those seconds?
Well, you need a plan.
Let's say we are dealing with direct criticism, which is usually the fastest trigger for that brain freeze we talked about. How do I formulate that response?
It depends entirely on the nature of the criticism. You basically have 3 paths forward in the criticism playbook.
Okay, let's go through them. What's path 1?
If the feedback is incredibly vague, say someone tells you, I just don't think this project is working, your best move is to receive and reflect.
Receive and reflect. Give me an example of what that sounds like.
You use those bought seconds to say, that's actually useful feedback. Can you say more about that? Or what specifically would you change?
Oh, that's smart. That puts the burden of work back on them. You don't have to guess what they mean or frantically defend the entire project in English. You force them to be specific.
Exactly. Now, what if the criticism isn't vague? What if it is just flat out inaccurate?
That's the worst, when they are just wrong. That's path 2.
Yes. Path 2 is you push back calmly. You do not have to accept a false premise.
But how do you do that without starting a fight?
You use your pause, and then you say, I see it a bit differently. Can I explain my thinking? Or simply, that wasn't my intention.
Notice the absence of defensive language there. You weren't saying you're wrong.
Right. You're just establishing a different perspective. It's very composed.
Okay, and what is the third path?
The third path is acknowledge and redirect.
Let's do a mini role play to see how that third option plays out, because I want listeners to hear the tone.
Okay, let's do it.
I will play the annoying colleague. We're in a meeting, and I look at you and say, honestly, I think your presentation was a complete mess and totally disorganized.
Right. Well, that is fair feedback. Can I ask, which part felt disorganized to you?
Mostly the structure in the second half. It made no sense.
Okay, I hear you. I'll look at that for next time. Thanks for being direct.
Wow. Okay, wait. I noticed you completely ignored the premise of my critique.
I did.
I called your work a mess, and you didn't defend the second half of the presentation at all. Is that intentional?
Highly intentional. The true power of that interaction lies entirely in what I didn't do.
Because a defensive counterattack validates the emotional nature of my critique.
Exactly. And groveling or over-apologizing gives away my authority. By pausing, clarifying the specific issue, and treating your emotional statement as mere data, I kept the professional boundary entirely intact.
You responded to the facts, not the emotion.
Exactly.
Okay, but that assumes the other person is acting good faith and just delivered a clunky critique. What if they aren't?
That's when things get tricky.
What if I use my buy time phrase and they just keep coming at me louder and more aggressive? We have to look at our next vocabulary word. Escalate.
Yes, escalation. This is where situational awareness is critical. When a conversation starts to escalate, when you feel that intensity spiking, the pace quickening, and voices getting louder, your priority shifts entirely.
Away from defending your point?
Completely away from defending your point. It moves strictly to de-escalating. reducing that tension.
The guide flags some very specific warning signs that a conversation is escalating into a conflict. It's not always just volume, right?
No, not at all. It's often when questions start acting as accusations.
Like, why would you do it like that?
Right. That isn't a question, it's an attack. Or the dreaded use of absolute language, the you always or you never statements.
Ugh, I hate those. You never listen to my ideas.
The absolute statements are incredibly dangerous because they are designed to bait you. When someone says, you never include me on these emails, your brain immediately wants to provide an itemized list of every time you did include them.
Yeah, you want to litigate the word never.
And the second you do that, you have been pulled into an emotional argument. You took the bait.
So instead of taking the bait, you use de-escalation phrases. You address the dynamic of the conversation directly.
Yes. You say something like, I want to keep this productive. Can we lower the temperature a bit?
Or, can we take a step back? I think we're talking past each other. I have to say, I love the phrase, lower the temperature.
Very effective.
It is such a vivid, neutral way to point out that the energy is wrong without calling the person hysterical or saying, calm down. Because telling someone to calm down never works.
Never. It usually makes them much angrier. But lower the temperature separates the person from the problem. You are addressing the temperature in the room, not their specific bad behavior, which makes it much easier for them to back down without losing face.
That is so practical. Now, what if the conversation does boil over anyway? We aren't perfect.
Right. Sometimes we lose our composure. When that happens, you need post-argument recovery phrases to clean up the mess later.
Like going back to them after everyone has cooled off.
Exactly. You approach them later and say, I don't think either of us was at our best earlier. Can we come back to this?
I am so glad you brought up the aftermath, because there is an apology phrase in the source material that is just pure gold.
Oh, I know the one you mean.
It's this. I apologize for how I said that.
No.
Not for what I said, but for how I said it. I want to really highlight this because this is arguably the most sophisticated tool in the entire guide.
It requires immense emotional intelligence to execute. Why does that specific phrasing stand out to you so much?
Because it reminds me of returning a defective product to a store. Let's say I buy a toaster and it's broken.
Okay, a broken toaster.
I take it back to the store, but I am so mad about it being broken that I throw the toaster at the cashier.
Oh, wow.
Later, I realize I acted terribly and I have to apologize. But I'm not apologizing for returning the toaster. The toaster is broken and my core message was correct. I am apologizing because I threw it at the cashier.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Right. This phrase allows you to stand completely firm on your boundary and your message while taking total accountability for a flawed emotional delivery.
It perfectly separates the content of the argument from the delivery of the argument. It disarms the other person because you are offering a genuine apology, but it prevents you from becoming a doormat.
You aren't backing down from the truth of the issue.
Exactly. Now, sometimes lowering the temperature or clarifying your delivery isn't enough because you simply fundamentally disagree with the other person.
You're just at a total impasse.
Right. You don't want to escalate, but you absolutely cannot agree.
This is what the sources refer to as calibrating your disagreement. You don't have to feign agreement just to keep the peace. You need to know how to navigate the spectrum of polite disagreement without triggering a war.
And that spectrum ranges from soft to firm.
Let's give some examples for the listeners. A soft disagreement is gentle, like, I see your point, but I'm not sure I fully agree.
Right. It leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Then you move to a direct disagreement. I'm going to respectfully push back on that.
Let's look at the mechanics of the phrase respectfully, or with respect in English.
Yes, that's a very specific cultural tool.
When you place those words immediately before a disagreement, they act as a verbal warning label.
It signals to the listener's brain that a challenge is coming, but it explicitly frames that challenge as intentional and civil.
It cushions the blow of the disagreement without weakening the substance of your point at all.
Then we get to the firm disagreements. I understand your position, but I can't support it. Or the very blunt, I strongly disagree.
But I have a real concern here for our listener.
What's that?
Well, if you are an intermediate learner using firm, rigid language, like I strongly disagree in a second language, and your pronunciation or intonation is a bit tense because your adrenaline is pumping, aren't you risking sounding incredibly aggressive?
It is a very valid concern. And it comes back to the difference between boundary setting and aggression.
Which is?
Aggression is an emotional reaction. It usually attacks the person. Firmness is a thoughtful response. It attacks the premise.
But you're saying tone matters.
Hugely. If your body language and tone are hostile,
Yeah.
the polite words won't save you. Which is why if you feel that your adrenaline is too high to deliver a firm disagreement calmly, you have to execute a tactical retreat.
Meaning you just walk away.
You normalize the need for space. When we are attacked, walking away feels like losing. We want to stay and fight to prove we are right.
Especially if we feel misunderstood because of a language barrier.
Exactly. But stepping away to collect your thoughts is the ultimate way to prevent an aggressive reaction. You simply state, I need a few minutes before I respond to this. Or, I'm not in a place to have this conversation right now.
That reframes the retreat entirely. You aren't fleeing, you are taking control of the timeline.
Right. You don't have to have the perfect English comeback right that very second.
You are allowed to pause the game, go process your vocabulary, let your amygdala calm down, and then return later saying, thanks for giving me time to think. Here's what I want to say.
Controlling the pacing of the interaction is the absolute height of being composed. You refuse to let their urgency dictate your timeline.
We have covered a massive amount of ground here today. We've looked at the neuroscience of the pause, the psychological buffer of acknowledging,
Handling inaccurate criticism, de-escalating the temperature.
and the power of the tactical retreat. But if someone listening is backed into a corner tomorrow, their mind goes completely blank, and they can only remember one single thing from this entire deep dive. What is the golden rule?
The guide highlights one phrase as the single most powerful tool in any difficult conversation.
And what is it?
It is incredibly simple. I'd like to understand your perspective. Can you tell me more?
I'd like to understand your perspective. Can you tell me more? I have to push back on this one.
Go on.
If someone is yelling at me or being incredibly condescending, asking them to tell me more feels like handing them a microphone. Doesn't that just invite more abuse? Why would I want to encourage them to keep talking?
It feels completely counterintuitive, but it operates like conversational judo.
Conversational judo.
Yeah. When someone comes at you with aggressive, confrontational energy, they are bracing for a fight. They expect resistance.
They want you to argue back.
Exactly. But when you refuse to resist and instead meet them with genuine, calm curiosity, you remove the friction they were relying on. You use their own momentum to throw them off balance.
Because they can't really fight someone who is just calmly asking them to explain themselves.
Exactly. But on a deeper neurological level, asking, can you tell me more, forces the other person out of their emotional amygdala and into their logical prefrontal cortex.
Oh, they have to stop emoting and start explaining.
Yes. And brilliantly, from a language learning perspective, handing them the microphone buys you an immense amount of time. You get to listen, regulate your own nervous system, and prepare your composed response while they do all the talking.
You are neutralizing their attack by making them do all the work. It is incredibly strategic.
It really is.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? The overarching goal of all these tools isn't to turn you into an unfeeling robot or to teach you how to suppress your valid frustrations.
No, not at all.
It's to ensure that your true self, your deep competence, and your actual personality aren't lost in translation simply because the pressure is on.
By understanding the mechanics behind these interactions, you can actively move from instinctively reacting to thoughtfully responding.
Right. You stay composed.
You maintain your composure under fire, establish firm boundaries without aggression, and actively de-escalate tension before it turns into a permanent conflict.
You have that third option. You don't have to freeze and you don't have to explode. You have the tools to navigate the space in between.
And if we step back and look at the bigger picture, it leaves us with a rather provocative thought.
What's that?
Well, this playbook, these tools, and these psychological mechanisms were specifically compiled to help non-native English speakers navigate the double burden of managing a second language and a high-stress emotion.
Right.
But when you look at these phrases, the pauses, the boundaries, the separation of delivery and content, aren't these exact skills something that most native speakers desperately need to learn in their own language?
No, absolutely.
True composure isn't a language skill at all. It is a universal human competency.
I can think of a dozen native speakers who could dramatically improve their lives by learning how to pause and ask, can you tell me more? Instead of just screaming back. We all need to practice this.
We really do.
Which brings us to our final question for you. What is the hardest situation for you to stay calm in? Is it receiving unearned feedback from a boss? Is it when a colleague uses that absolute you always language?
Think about that specific scenario. Pick just one phrase from today's deep dive and try practicing it out loud this week.
Building that muscle memory with just one phrase can entirely change the dynamic of your next difficult conversation.
It really can.
And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive. Because the next time someone says something annoying, unfair, or rude to you in English, you won't freeze, you won't panic, you'll just pause, take a breath, and take control.